My name is Eduardo, this is Tristan, Rafael, Marcus, and Sina. And today I have a question for you. When you get your shiny new phone, computer, or another electronic, what do you do with the old one? Do you perhaps sell it, give it away to someone, take it to a recycling point, or do you just throw it away in the trash? Don't do that, by the way. As you can see, you make it sad. Or maybe you're like me, and you just put it on the bottom of a drawer and then forget it exists for several years. Is anyone else here like that? Which one of these are you? Oh, no one else is like me? Oh, man. Okay, but why am I asking this? Because this is the topic of our presentation, e-waste. But what is e-waste? E-waste is basically discarded electronics and their parts. And that includes the non-metallic parts, like the plastic or the screens. But before we talk about that, here's an interesting fact. In 2019, the world generated an amount of e-waste that's equivalent to around 57 billion US dollars in raw materials. In Canadian dollars, that's about $77 billion. That's a big number. So these are the topics we'll be covering today. The categories of e-waste, the effects of the e-waste, the EcoCity standards, the actions against e-waste, and the recycling of the e-waste. And to cover the first topic, I'll be passing the word to to Tristan now.
All right. Thank you, Eduardo, for that introduction. So I'll be covering the 6 categories of e-waste. So the following slides are actually from the Global E-Waste Monitor of 2020, which were curated by the United Nations with UNITAR, which stands for United Nations Institute for Research and Training. So these guys categorize e-waste into 6 categories. And I'll help guide you to examples with each one. So the first one is our temperature exchange equipment. So these are our refrigerators, freezers, air conditioners. Most of these items are made up of plastic, metal, and glass. But unique to these items, they may also contain coolant. And most coolants are manufactured by a company called Freon, F-R-E-O-N. And if you do a quick search online about Freon, you'll find many articles condemning the company because most Freon coolants are actually harmful to the ozone layer. And harming the ozone layer will result into global warming. So you can see in this photo, prolonged exposure to the outside world, fridges will eventually will break, and coolant will spill out and be exposed to the environment. Number 2, screens and monitors. So our TVs and monitors will be here. All of these items will have one of many different types of displays. There's an LCD display, LED displays, OLED, but I want to focus on LCD displays in particular, because an LCD display, about 98% of its content can be recycled, because it's mainly made up of plastic, and reused to create new products. So instead of them accumulating in a dump site as this, it's best for us to do research if there are like nearby facilities that would accept our old TVs. So I believe lamps are the most frequently disposed items out there. Personally, I think I dispose about 3 lamps a year because I have to replace light bulbs in my house. You can just drop this off to your nearest Home Depot or Rona Home Center if you're familiar with that. So there are two size equipments, and they divide it into large and small equipment. Unfortunately, I can't find like a base reference of weight to specify what item belongs in the large equipment category or the small equipment category. I don't know how much an item should weigh. So I picked 3 obvious items here, which will probably be in the large equipment category. Washing machines, dryers, and electric stove. Washing machines in particular are commonly coated with zinc, and zinc, although healthy at times, if exposed and unsupervised with an organism in large quantities, it can actually be harmful. And later on, Rafael will talk about more in depth about the toxic elements that may be in e-waste and how they will affect organisms such as us and animals. So here's the small equipment category: vacuum cleaners, mini fridges, calculators, and electronic toys. Most of these items could probably be handed out to your friend or your neighbor. Maybe if you have a friend that's interested in one of your toys, you can just give them to them. I actually have a couple calculators at home. If you guys are interested, I can provide some calculators. Anyway, these items can also be dropped off at your nearest Home Depot. Maybe some facilities only accept specific items, and we can just simply do a search on the internet to find what items you can drop off. So here's a more specific category, small IT and telecommunication equipment. So these are going to be our cell phones, computer components, like our GPUs, CPUs, and even your landline telephones. Again, these are going to be made of plastic, metal, glass, but predominantly, these items may also contain aluminum. And what's interesting about aluminum is that, I can even quote Wikipedia here. They said that aluminum is an infinitely recyclable material, and it takes up to 95% less energy to recycle it than to produce new aluminum. So aluminum we can infinitely reuse, and we can even conserve energy by reusing aluminum, rather than synthesizing new aluminum. In fact, most of the aluminum we use today are just recycled aluminum all the way from the 1740s, I believe. All right, after discussing the 6 categories of e-waste, hopefully you guys have an idea of what type of item goes into e-waste. I want to reference some heavy objects, because we're going to be talking about really big numbers very soon. So in here I have 2 objects, actually. I have a Toyota Sienna, a tank. Toyota Sienna weighs about 2,000 kilograms, and a tank would weigh about 50 tons. Is any one of you brave enough to try and guess how much e-waste we produced in the year of 2019 alone? Okay, Raj, thank you. Kind of close, but not really. Anyway, it's actually 53.6 million tons. I messed up here. There should be an M here. 53.6 megatons, so million tons. So it's not even comparable anymore, because a tank, you would have to multiply at least 1,000,000 times to reach this number. So it's an incomprehensible number. Here's a diagram from the Global E-Waste Monitor. Hopefully you guys can't see the numbers, but this should say, this here says 44.4 million. That's not. For 2014. And then in 2019, again, 53.6 million. So that's in the span of 5 years. So if you would compare the numbers between 44.4 million and 53.6, that's about 23% increase. And they actually made predictions all the way to the year of 2030. That says 74.7 million, just ignore this for now. 74.7 million tons of e-waste. So that's about, if you do the math, 39% increase in the span of 11 years. But the pattern here is that it's increasing every year. So here we are revisiting the 6 categories of e-waste, and they're the numbers that amount to total amount of e-waste. So for our fridges, our coolers, air conditioners, about 10.8 million tons of e-waste. Our TVs and monitors, 6.7 million tons. Our light bulbs, 0.9 million tons. Our large equipment such as dryers, washing machines, 13.1 million tons. Here, our small equipment, 70.4 million tons. And our computer parts, phones, 4.7 million tons. You can see that 5 of these are increasing, but the screen and monitor says negative 1%. How is that possible? Are we becoming wiser in recycling screens and monitors? Instead, I believe even the global e-waste researchers agreed that the reason why this is a negative 1% is due to the fact that TV manufacturers nowadays are developing lighter displays. So if you would compare an old CRT monitor to a modern LG display, and then you look from the side, you can see a CRT monitor might be this way, while an LG display might only be like a pen kind of width in display. So I want to fix these numbers here, because this should actually say 5,360,000,000 kilograms. So that's actually going to be 8 zeros instead of 2, right? That's a big number. So in pounds, it would be, let me just make sure, 120 billion pounds. Instead of 3 zeros, we will have 10 zeros here. So 2030, again, 74.7 million tons, not 71.7. This should be about 7 billion, 470 million kilograms. So that's 8 zeros again. And in pounds, it would be 160 billion pounds, which has 10 zeros. So now that we see a magnitude of numbers here, they're incomprehensible, right? Why do we care? We don't really see this outside. I'll pass it off to Rafael to talk about the negative effects of these numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. So now that we've gotten a certain magnitude of how big our e-waste collection has gotten, why should we care? Why does it matter that e-waste has been piling up and piling on for ages? What does it do to our planet? That's the main thing that matters. So this will be what my slide will be talking about, effects of e-waste on the world at large. Before I start, here's a summary or key facts of e-waste of my slide, my next few slides. So e-waste is the fastest growing solid stream waste in the world, right? About 53.6 million tons of e-waste was collected in only 2019, and 74.7 is predicted in 2030, as Tristan said, and only 17.4% of that was recycled. That's about 9 megatons of e-waste. That's almost nothing compared to the full amount of what it's at. And basically, my next few slides will be covering about the contents of e-waste, so the toxic metals, toxic chemicals that are inside e-waste, and how informal recycling activities, these bad recycling habits of e-waste are affecting the planet right now. So contents of e-waste. So there are many different toxic metals inside e-waste, almost like too many to cover, and the next slide will show that. But here are just 4 of them and what they can do to your body. So lead. Lead is very, very dangerous, like incredibly dangerous. It can cause severe brain damage, nervous system damage, and convulsions, so seizures and stuff, and even death. Cadmium. So cadmium is breathing high levels of cadmium can cause a permanent nervous system damage. Mercury was carcinogenic material. So is nickel. Both of these can cause cancer, and nickel especially is more dangerous. Mercury only high levels, not high levels. Mercury can actually be low levels. Nickel, also low levels of nickel can cause cancer and irreparable damage to the human body. So these are also organic compounds. Better slide would be this. So this scary lady is all the metals and what they can do to the human body. Over here we see lead, which I already told you can cause brain damage. There's over there is selenium, which is called selenosis, which is hair loss and brittle fingernails. There's cadmium. Cadmium can cause kidney damage. So long-term exposure to cadmium can cause kidney damage. And all this is basically what these metals inside of e-waste can do to the human body. Next slide. So adverse health effects found to be associated with e-waste. Basically, what I just covered is adverse effects, but now I'll be covering adverse effects of children. Why children? Because children are more often used than adults to collect e-waste in third world countries, because most of our e-waste is unfortunately dumped in places like Nigeria or India. And children are used because they have, small hands, and they can easily take apart metals and dismantle metals inside of phones or batteries, and they're better at digging through e-waste and cheap labor, obviously. So before I go on to that, this is just a summary of the adverse health outcomes, and I showed a baby because adverse birth outcomes, it can be stillborn children and premature birth, so this baby would be dead. Cross it off. Anyways, it can also cause altered neurodevelopment. Basically, children can be out of the education system in a matter of, not a matter of minutes. If women, if they're exposed to e-waste quite often, they can damage the children and when they're born, their neurodevelopment. So they're basically out of the education system. There's cancer risk, hearing loss, as we mentioned, cancer risk, as we mentioned, hearing loss, skin diseases. So all of this is a summary of what e-waste can do. This is an example of a kid going through e-waste. As you can see, he's doing a pretty good job, I guess. Basically, if you imagine going through, I don't know, phones and lots of items and digging through them and getting yourself exposed or breathing in those toxic metals, toxic chemicals, you can imagine what it can do to this child and many children. And as we saw, it can cause brain damage, permanent, irreparable damage to the human body. Next slide. So, vulnerability of children in e-waste recycling. Children are highly susceptible to the toxic chemicals more often than regular people, because regular adult humans, because they are, little humans, and their immune system isn't as developed as an aged adult. So, show you how often children use e-waste recycling. About 16.5 million children are in the industrial sector, including waste recycling processing. So that's a massive amount of children that are used to recycle and pick up e-waste. That's almost comparable amount, just like the amount of e-waste. It's massive. And they're used because cheap labor and small hands. So good at dismantling objects, picking up objects, going through hazardous material and burning stuff. Anyways, impact of informal e-waste recycling. So this is a very important part of my presentation because it talks about how when people use bad e-waste recycling practices, what it can do to the environment and the people around it. So community exposure. Basically, community exposure is when the community is exposed when to e-waste hazards when people don't properly take their e-waste to the recycling facilities. So when they leave it outside or they don't go to like your local Home Depot to recycle it, e-waste can expose, e-waste can go through our food, water, and air. Environmental contamination. Basically when e-waste gathers in a place and rainwater occurs, it can seep into our soil or can flood to our rivers and cause contamination of our food, water, or air. And other practices just like dumping into landfills or burning e-waste, it can cause a lot of damage to our air. Occupational exposure. So people who work with e-waste, children and sometimes pregnant women, unfortunately, they breathe in a lot of toxic fumes from toxic chemicals from the e-waste, and their body can be permanently damaged, but also children who play with dismantled electronics, they can breathe in contaminated dust and fumes. So environmental impact of e-waste, this is basically talking about how e-waste impacts the environment. Talking about accumulation, when waste accumulates, like in dumps or at landfills, it can damage our soil, air, and water. Hazardous practices, as we talked about, they can damage our individuals, humans, but also the environment if we don't properly take care of the e-waste. And resource loss, so valuable resources like silicon, which are used to make computer chips, or indium, they're lost because of improper recycling of e-waste. And basically, at the end of the day, if we don't properly recycle our e-waste, right, our carbon footprint increases, and we lose a lot of materials, a lot of valuable minerals. So, and if you go back to the fact that only 17.4% of our e-waste is recycled, we realize how much damage it's doing currently to the environment. So next I'll pass it on to Eduardo to talk about eco-cities and how we can achieve it.
So I'll be briefly talking about the eco-city standards. But first, what is an eco-city? An eco-city is basically a city that can provide for the inhabitants without consuming more renewable resources than it produces. And it does that without damaging the ecosystem around it. It is divided in 4 pillars: the urban design, the biogeophysical features, the social-cultural features, and the ecological imperatives. And these 4 pillars are then divided in 18 eco-city standards. But I'll be focusing on the material resources since that's the one relevant to e-waste. Although, as you have seen from Rafi's presentation, it affects everything around it. So the material resources, in order to be considered an eco-city, you need 100% of the material inputs can be captured and reused for equal or greater use within 2,000 kilometers of the city. So you need 100% to be considered eco-city, which the eco-city standard 1. But as you have seen from Tristan and Rafi's presentation, we're still at 17 to 20%. So we still have a long way to go to get there. But we can get there. And to talk about how we can do that, I'll pass on the word to Marcus to talk a bit. Sorry.
So we know the harm of e-waste, but what is the world doing against e-waste? Well, most developed countries have recycling programs, and in Canada, each province has their own recycling program. But most notably, Sweden and Norway have the best recycling programs. For example, in Norway, they use machine recycling, where they use artificial intelligence, cameras and sensors to recycle and sort recycling into paper, metal, and plastic. And in Sweden, they use a laser-based technology to extract valuable metal out of circuit boards. And they also use, they also use a system to keep track of e-waste transportation between e-waste collection sites. And they do this so they can make sure that e-waste transportation is efficient and accurate. Unfortunately, less developed countries have fewer regulations for e-waste, and a lot of e-waste ends up there. So we know the harm of e-waste, but what can we do about e-waste? So think about small actions you can do in your life to minimize e-waste. For example, think twice before throwing something away. Could you resell it or give it to someone else? And think about what you buy. Could you buy a product secondhand, or consider buying a product with a longer lifespan? And if you do choose to throw something away, see if you can recycle instead of just throwing it away. Now, one of the most important things we can do about e-waste is to raise awareness about e-waste. While the average person can't do much about e-waste, just by informing others about e-waste, we can help steer people into picking more e-waste friendly choices. And these small actions over time, multiplied by many people, can have a substantial impact on e-waste. And I'll be passing it off to Sina, who will be talking about recycling.
Thanks, Marcus. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about e-waste recycling. How we can do the recycling. Basically, recycling means recollecting, extracting, and getting the valuable materials out of the electronic disposals. What are the examples? Cell phones and batteries. Basically, cell phones and batteries, they do have some valuable metals, such as aluminium and glass. Aluminium is 100% recyclable, as Tristan already mentioned, but the price of the recycled aluminium is 4 times lower than the regular produced aluminium out of the natural resources. Lamps and other lighting equipment, they do have a more percentage content of the glass in their specification, so they can be used to produce the raw materials and being sent to the other branches or factories out there. All right, so in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about how e-waste recycling, what are the challenges that e-waste recycling is faced of e-waste disposals. For example, here we see that there was a 5G network in 2 years being offered from the other companies that caused the more consumers, more users to more tending to order new products, new phones that they have 5G internet network speed. And eventually, the old phones, what's happened to them? That's the main concern. They being thrown into the trash, or how they get recycled during that time. That's the e-waste part. All right, the next part is that we have a gaming developments. Every year, new graphic cards being advised and proposed to us. So in order for the user to interact with the games, they have to upgrade their hardwares every time regularly. So what's gonna happen to the previous ones? Are they gonna throw it away, or are they gonna keep it, or it's gonna be recycled? That's one of the factors that causing the challenges for the e-waste recycling. Another one is like repairing market. As my own personal experience, I had the phone of Galaxy Note 8, and in the 2 years ago, I went to Metrotown in order to repair my screen broken. Unfortunately, it cost me about like $600. If I adding $200 more on it, I can actually buy a new phone. So as a consumer, for me, would you prefer to buy a new one, or would you keep your previous phone? with more probability of having more more getting broken down oftenly or not. We have to work on it. All right, so in this part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on statistics of e-waste, researched by United Nations professors. All right, in 2014, we have 44 million tons e-waste produced, which is only 17%, which is like 7.5 million tons, I would say. Eventually, in the gap of 5 years to the 2019, we succeed to produce, develop 0.4% more more e-waste recycling. What's the thing is, how much million tons of e-waste being generated between this period? About like 9 million tons. That's much. How much is can be compared to the e-waste recycling? 0.4%. So we have a lot to do to reach there. And according to the experts, professors, they're estimating that in 2030, we're gonna produce about 74.7 million tons of e-waste. Unfortunately, our plant doesn't have that capacity to handle that big issue. Because as Rafael said, we have to focus on what kind of solutions we have, how we can deal with huge amounts of e-waste that we have here. All right, I'm gonna pass it to Eduardo to talk about some relative thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do some closing thoughts now. When was the last time you replaced your electronics? How many times have you done that? Where did you really need those replacements? Do you know anyone who improperly disposes of the electronics? Do you dispose of them properly? Let's do a numbers recap. In 2019, as Tristan said, we produced an amount of e-waste that weighs around the same as about 1 million military tanks. And of all that weight, we only recycle around 17 to 20%. And it is estimated that in 2030, 7 years from now, the number will rise to around 1,400,000 weight in military tanks in weight. That's a big number. So as IT professionals, we have more impact on this situation than the average person, either negative by consuming more electronics or technology, or by finding ways to reduce the consumption in our workplaces, or some of us might even end up helping develop technologies to reduce the e-waste. So what we can take away from this? E-waste is a big problem and it's growing. So, but we can change that scenario. And we better change that scenario, or else. Did anyone here watch this movie? Yeah, it's a very good movie. If anyone didn't watch it, I won't give spoilers, but you can kind of infer what it's about from the image. Now, before we open it for questions, I just wanted to show this photo here. This is an art installation in a strip mall in Brazil. I passed in front of this several times. It's very well made. But the interesting thing about this is the horse. Because, I don't know if you can see here, it's made mostly of e-waste. It's all pieced together to form a horse. Like there's a controller here, a power drill, some old phones. I'll just leave it here this year while we open up for questions. So, does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
So, in the list of global e-waste trends, it was global, I guess.
Yeah.
What is Canada the same as that, or is it different? Did you find any information about how Canada is doing on those things?
Yes. So unfortunately, for the e-waste recycling part,
Yeah.
Canada is not in the 10th of the countries who are doing effectively recycling. There are basically several criteria that is being selected. For example, population. Other thing is amount of generated of e-waste electronic devices. But unfortunately, Canada, according to the resources out there, I think I have it in the link below. We don't. Canada doesn't do any good thing about e-waste. Unfortunately, they need to bring in more attention. We need to call for more action about how we are recycling. Basically,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
most of the statistics don't specifically pick out e-waste. It's just
Yes.
waste in general, so we can't really.
Yeah, there's
Right.
not any.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's not any generally accepted way. As the electronic devices are really broad, the way that it's being recycled, the refrigerator and the microwave, or for example, laptops or monitors, they're completely different. They do have a different methods. And unfortunately, according to the United Nations, there is not any official accepted way of recycling different products at the same time. So the countries, they do have different regulations and policy about how they can actually recycle the materials. Yeah. There's a really challenge. So any questions?
Any other questions? No?
All right,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for attending.